Today's story reveals the impossible truth about an enslaved man who became the heir to a Gilded Age mansion and dared to take on America's wealthiest dynasty. What unfolded broke every law of his era, threatened an empire built on silence and power, and exposed a secret the system was never meant to face. This is a heavy, intense account. Pause for a moment, breathe, and listen closely. Before we begin, please subscribe and comment which city and country you're listening from. Your participation helps keep these stories remembered instead of buried. Stay till the end, because this story raises a question history still refuses to answer. Let's begin. In the autumn of 1891, a black man walked through the gardens of one of America's most expensive mansions. He wore a tailored suit worth more than most workers earned in a year. His shoes were polished. His posture was flawless, and when armed guards surrounded him with weapons drawn, he didn't run. He didn't beg. He just smiled and spoke 7 words that would change everything. "Tell Theodore that Bessie's son came home." The guards froze. The head of security, Patrick O'Brien, who had worked for the Harrington family for 15 years, felt his blood turn cold. He had heard that name before, Bessie. A name never spoken inside the mansion. A name belonging to a ghost. A name the Harringtons had paid good money to erase from history. By the time O'Brien recovered enough to ask for the stranger's name, the man had vanished into the night. He left no trace, no footprints, no sign he had ever been there. But inside Rosacliff Manor, behind marble walls and golden chandeliers, panic had already begun to spread. Who was this man? Where did he come from? And what did he know about Bessie? This is the true story of Solomon Graves. A man born into slavery who died a millionaire. A man who spent 30 years planning the ruin of one of America's most powerful families. A man who proved that revenge, when served cold enough, can burn hotter than any fire. But to understand how Solomon Graves brought down the Harrington dynasty, we must go back to the beginning, back to a cotton plantation in Georgia, back to 1849, back to the night a baby was born in secret, setting off a chain of events that would shake the foundations of the Gilded Age. Magnolia Fields Plantation covered 12,000 acres of prime Georgia farmland. It was owned by Augustus Harrington II, heir to a railroad fortune stretching from Savannah to New York. Augustus was 32 in 1849. He had a wife named Helena from Old Charleston money, a son named Edward, age 5, another son named Theodore, only 2, and he had 347 slaves who worked his cotton fields from sunrise to sunset. Among them was a woman named Bessie. She was 24. Born on the plantation, she had never set foot beyond its borders. Her mother, a field hand, had died of fever when Bessie was 9. Her father was unknown, as was common for most slaves. But Bessie stood out. Her skin was the color of honey. Her eyes were large and expressive. At 16, she had been chosen to work inside the big house as a domestic servant. Working inside the big house was considered a privileged lighter work, better food, fewer beatings. But it carried dangers the field hands never faced. Dangers Bessie understood all too well. Augustus Harrington first noticed Bessie one hot summer evening in 1847, when she was serving dinner to his guests. She was 22. He was 30. Bored with his fragile wife, who seemed sick more often than well. The way Bessie moved through the dining room, graceful and silent, caught his attention. The way she kept her eyes down, yet still saw everything, fascinated him. Within a week, he had her transferred to his personal study as a cleaner. Within a month, everyone in the slave quarters knew what was happening behind those closed doors. No one spoke of it aloud, but they all knew. They saw Bessie return to the quarters late at night with her dress disheveled and her eyes empty. They saw the master send for her whenever his wife was away visiting relatives. They saw, they understood, and they kept their mouths shut because speaking meant death. In the spring of 1849, Bessie realized she was pregnant. She tried to hide it, wrapping her belly with cloth, wearing looser dresses, avoiding the mistress of the house at all costs. But by August, there was no hiding anymore. Her belly was too big. The baby was too close. Everyone on the plantation waited to see what would happen. Helena Harrington was not a stupid woman. She knew about her husband's visits to the slave quarters. She knew about Bessie. And when she saw Bessie's swollen belly, she knew exactly whose child it was. But Helena was also practical. She came from a world where men did what they did and wives looked the other way. Causing a scandal would only hurt her. So she did what women of her class did. She pretended not to see, pretended not to know, and waited for the problem to solve itself. The baby came on September 15, 1849, in a small cabin at the edge of the slave quarters. An old slave woman named Martha, who had delivered over 100 babies in her 60 years, helped Bessie through the birth. It was a difficult labor. Bessie screamed for hours. The other slaves stood outside, listening, praying, hoping mother and child would survive. Just before midnight, a baby boy took his first breath. Bessie held him and cried. Not from sadness, not from joy, but from something in between. She knew what her son's life would be, a slave like her, working the fields like her mother, suffering like everyone she had ever loved. But looking at his face, his tiny fingers, his eyes already showing a hint of gray, she made a decision. Your name is Solomon, she whispered. And one day, you're going to be free. Ain't old Martha, cleaning up after the birth, heard those words. She also noticed something else, something that made her pause. The baby's skin was lighter than Bessie's. Much lighter. And those gray eyes were not the eyes of a slave. They were the eyes of Augustus Harrington. Martha had been on the plantation for 40 years. She had seen things, kept secrets, survived, and she knew this baby, this evidence of the master's sin, was in terrible danger. If Helena decided the child threatened her own son's inheritance, she could have him sold or killed with a single word. So Martha did something she had never done before. After Bessie fell asleep, exhausted, Martha took a small object from her pocket, a gold medallion she had found in the master's study years ago, dropped and forgotten behind a bookshelf. The medallion had the initials A.H. engraved. Augustus Harrington. Martha had kept it hidden, not knowing why, just feeling it might matter someday. That night she buried the medallion under an old oak tree at the edge of the property. She marked the spot with 3 small stones. If this child ever needed proof of who his father was, the proof would be waiting. Solomon Graves grew up in the shadow of the big house. He lived with his mother in a small cabin with 1 window, 1 door, and a dirt floor. He ate cornmeal mush for breakfast and beans for dinner. He wore clothes patched and repatched until there was more patch than original fabric, and from age 5 he worked. His first job was carrying water to the field hands. He woke before dawn, filled 2 wooden buckets from the well, and walked back and forth across the cotton fields until his arms felt like they would fall off. If he spilled water, he was beaten. If he was too slow, beaten. If he looked at a white person without lowering his eyes, beaten. That was his life. The only life he knew. But Bessie refused to let Solomon's spirit die. Every night after work, when the overseers had gone to sleep, she sat with him in their cabin and taught him things slaves were forbidden to learn. She taught him to read, using a Bible stolen from the big house, 1 page at a time. She taught him numbers with pebbles and sticks. She taught him about the world beyond the plantation, a world she had never seen but had heard about from other slaves sold and moved from place to place. There's a whole country out there, she would tell him. Cities bigger than you can imagine. Places where black people are free, where they own businesses and wear fine clothes, and nobody can tell them what to do. Solomon would listen with wide eyes. Can we go there, Mama? Bessie would stroke his hair and smile sadly. Someday, baby, someday. But she knew the truth. There was no escape from magnolia fields. The plantation was surrounded by miles of wilderness. Runaway slaves were hunted with dogs and guns. Those caught were whipped until their backs were raw meat, then put back to work as a warning. Bessie had seen it, heard the screams, knew that trying to run was almost certain death. So she did the only thing she could. She gave her son knowledge, hope, and a secret. When Solomon was 7, Bessie told him the truth about his father. They were sitting by the creek that ran along the plantation's edge. A Sunday afternoon, their few hours of rest. Solomon was throwing stones into the water, watching them skip. Bessie was watching him, building courage. Solomon, baby, there's something I need to tell you. He looked at her with those gray eyes, so like his father's. What is it, Mama? She took a deep breath. You know how the other children have fathers who live in the quarters with them. How they know who their daddies are. Solomon nodded. He had noticed. He had wondered. But he had learned, as all slave children learned, that some questions were not safe to ask. Your daddy doesn't live in the quarters, Solomon. Your daddy lives in the big house. The boy was confused. The big house. But only white people live in the big house. Bessie took his small hands in hers. That's right, baby. Your daddy is a white man. Your daddy is Master Harrington. Solomon was too young to fully understand. But he understood enough. Why his skin was lighter than other children's. Why the master sometimes looked at him with guilt and something else. Why the mistress would stare with cold hatred whenever he came near. He was different. He had always known he was different. Now he knew why. Does he know? Solomon asked. Does he know I'm his son? Bessie nodded. He knows, baby. He knows. Then why doesn't he help us? Why doesn't he set us free? Bessie pulled her son close. Because that's not how this world works, Solomon. Not for people like us. But someday, baby, things are going to change. And when they do, I need you to remember who you are. You're not just a slave. You're not just property. You're the son of Augustus Harrington. And one day, they're going to know it. Solomon never forgot those words. They burned into his memory like a brand. Years later, when everything had been taken from him, those words would be the fuel that kept him going. The overseer at Magnolia Fields was a man named Silas Crenshaw. 45 years old, 6 feet tall, with hands like slabs of meat. He had worked as an overseer for 20 years. First in Mississippi, then Alabama, finally Georgia. Known throughout the region as a man who could break any slave, no matter how stubborn. Plantation owners paid premium wages for his services. Silas took an immediate dislike to Solomon. Not personal, at least not at first. Silas disliked all slaves. He considered them animals, less than animals, tools that could talk, but had no more value than a plow or a mule. But Solomon was different. Solomon looked him in the eye when other slaves looked at the ground. Solomon asked questions when others kept silent. Solomon had pride, and Silas Crenshaw was very, very good at destroying pride. The beating started when Solomon was 10. Silas would find reasons, invent reasons, create reasons to punish the boy. Brought water too slowly. Looked at a white visitor wrong. Hummed while working. Disrespectful to the master's peace. Every offense, real or imagined, met with the whip. Scars accumulated on Solomon's back like a map of suffering. By 12, his skin was a patchwork of raised welts and smooth burns. Each one had a story. Each one was a lesson in what it meant to be property. But Silas never broke Solomon's spirit. No matter how many beatings, how much pain, something in Solomon's eyes remained undefeated. A spark, a flame that refused to die. "That boy ain't right," Silas would tell the other white workers. "Got something wrong in his head. Look at the way he looks at you. Like he's thinking things, planning things." The others would nod and agree. Agreeing with Silas was the safe thing to do. But they all noticed the same thing: Solomon was not like the other slaves, and that made him dangerous. What none of them knew was that Silas had his own suspicions about Solomon's parentage. The gray eyes, the light skin, the whispers in the quarters about Bessie and the master. He had put the pieces together. If Solomon was indeed Augustus Harrington's son, that made him a threat, not to Silas personally, but to the natural order. The idea that a slave could carry his master's blood, be half white, potentially claim a connection to the Harringtons, was an abomination. It went against everything Silas believed about the separation of races. So he beat Solomon harder than the others, gave him the worst jobs, made his life a living hell. In Silas's mind, he was doing God's work, putting a mongrel in his place, maintaining the proper order. And Solomon absorbed every beating, stored it away in memory, every blow, every insult, every drop of blood. He did not cry out, he did not beg, he just endured, remembered, and waited. His mother had taught him that things would change someday, and when that day came, Solomon intended to be ready. The year 1861 changed everything. The Civil War began in April when Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter. Within weeks, the whole country was at war. Southern states, including Georgia, seceded. Young men marched off to fight, and on plantations across the South, slaves began whispering about something they had never dared to hope for: freedom. Solomon was 12 when the war started. He didn't fully understand, but he understood enough. People were fighting over whether slavery should exist. The northern armies wanted to free the slaves. If the North won, his life would never be the same. The war years were hard at Magnolia Fields. Most young white men had gone to fight, leaving the plantation short-handed. Food became scarce as the Confederate Army requisitioned supplies. Slaves were worked harder than ever, and Silas Crenshaw, too old to fight, became even more brutal as his frustration grew. But something else hung in the air, something the slaves could feel but not name: hope. The possibility that the world they knew was ending, that someday, maybe soon, they would wake up free. Augustus Harrington watched the war with growing dread. He was 50 now, his health failing. His railroad empire, once stretching across the South, was being destroyed by Union forces. Every week brought news of another bridge blown up, another depot burned, another line cut. His fortune, once so secure, slipped through his fingers like sand. And in the quiet hours of the night, Augustus thought about Bessie, about Solomon, the son he had never acknowledged, about the weight of his sins. Helena Harrington had died in 1858, finally succumbing to the illness that had plagued her for years. Augustus had not remarried. His legitimate sons, Edward and Theodore, were both serving in the Confederate Army. Edward a captain, Theodore a lieutenant, fighting to preserve a way of life their father had built, fighting to keep people like Solomon in chains. One evening in the spring of 1862, Augustus did something no one expected. He called his lawyer to the plantation and dictated a new will. The lawyer, a nervous man named Samuel Whitfield, listened with growing alarm. The will contained the usual provisions: the plantation to Edward, railroad interests to Theodore, sums to relatives and charities. Then Augustus added a clause that made Whitfield's pen freeze midair. "I wish to acknowledge my natural son, born to the slave woman Bessie in 1849. Upon my death, Solomon is to be freed from bondage and granted the sum of 50 zulos and to be held in trust until he reaches the age of 40. Whitfield looked up. Sir, I must advise you. This clause is highly irregular. It could be contested. It could cause scandal. Augustus waved a dismissive hand. I don't care about scandal. I'm dying, Whitfield. I can feel it in my bones. And I'll be damned if I face my maker without trying to make things right. But sir, the other provisions. Your legitimate sons. My legitimate sons will inherit everything else. This is a pittance compared to what they're getting, but it's something. An acknowledgement that the boy exists, that he matters, that he's my blood. Whitfield had no choice. He wrote down Augustus's words, had the documents signed and witnessed, and locked them in his office safe. He hoped, for everyone's sake, that the will would never see the light of day. But things were never going to be normal again. The night of March 12, 1863, started like any other at Magnolia Fields. Slaves finished work at sundown, ate their meager dinners and slept. The moon was full, casting silver light across the cotton fields. The air was warm for March, with a hint of summer heat to come. Solomon was 14, tall for his age, broad shoulders, strong arms from years of hard labor. He slept in the same cabin as his mother, on a straw mattress more whole than mattress. Crickets drifted through the window. The smell of wood smoke hung in the air. He was dreaming when the screams started. His eyes snapped open. For a moment, confusion. Were the screams part of the dream? Then he smelled smoke. Fire. He jumped off his mattress. His mother's bed was empty. The door was open. Outside, orange light flickered against the darkness. Their cabin was on fire. Solomon ran outside, coughing as smoke filled his lungs. The entire front wall was engulfed. Flames climbed the dry wooden walls like a living thing. Somewhere inside, his mother was screaming, "Mama!" He ran toward the cabin, but the heat drove him back. Too intense. He couldn't see through the wall of fire. "Mama!" He tried again, shielding his face with his arms, forcing himself closer. His skin blistered. His eyes watered. But he kept going because his mother was in there. Then he saw her. Bessie was crawling through the doorway, her clothes on fire, skin blackened and peeling. She had dragged herself almost to the threshold before the flames overwhelmed her. Her eyes found Solomon through the smoke. Her mouth moved, forming words he could barely hear. The medallion. Martha. The oak tree. Solomon reached through the flames and grabbed his mother's hand. He pulled with all his strength, dragging her out. Her dress fell away in charred pieces. Her hair was gone, her face barely recognizable. But she was alive, barely. "Mama, hold on. Please hold on." Bessie's eyes were fading. Her breath came in short, painful gasps. But she had one more thing to say. "Avenge our blood." Then she was gone. Solomon held his mother's body in the dirt outside the burning cabin. He did not cry. He did not scream. He just sat there holding her while the fire consumed everything they had owned. The other slaves gathered watching, not knowing what to say or do. This kind of thing happened. Fires broke out. People died. That was life on a plantation. But Solomon knew something they didn't. In the moments before the fire started, he had seen a figure standing in the shadows near their cabin. A white man watching. Not trying to help, not raising the alarm, just watching. And when the fire started, the figure had walked away. Solomon didn't know who the man was. Smoke and darkness had hidden his features. But he knew one thing for certain: the fire was not an accident. Someone had murdered his mother. And whoever it was, Solomon was going to find them. The days after Bessie's death passed in a blur of grief and rage. Solomon buried her in the slave cemetery at the plantation's edge, in an unmarked grave like all the others. No money for a headstone, no permission for a proper funeral. Just a hole, her body, and dirt. The other slaves left him alone. They understood grief. They had all experienced it multiple times. But Solomon's grief was different. Cold, hard, focused. He spent hours thinking about the figure he had seen, trying to remember details. The man had been tall, wearing dark clothes. Something about the way he stood, the way he moved, seemed familiar. Then, 3 days after the fire, Solomon remembered old Martha. His mother's last words had mentioned Martha. The oak tree, the medallion. He found Martha in the evening after work, sitting outside her cabin smoking a pipe. She was over 60 now, ancient by slave standards. White hair, a network of wrinkles, but her eyes were still sharp. "Miss Martha," Solomon said, approaching carefully. "Can I talk to you?" Martha looked at him for a long moment. She had been expecting this visit, had been expecting it for 14 years. "Sit down, child." Solomon sat. "Your mama told you about the oak tree, didn't she?" He nodded. Martha took a long drag from her pipe. "I've been keeping something for you, Solomon, keeping it since the night you was born. I always knew this day would come. Just hoped it wouldn't come so soon." She told him about the medallion, the initials, how she had buried it under the oak tree, marked by 3 stones. She told him about Augustus Harrington, the affair, everything she had seen and heard over the years. But there was something else, something even more important. Inside that medallion, child, there's a key. A tiny little key hidden in the back. I don't know what it opens. Never did figure it out. But your mama knew. She told me once that it was the key to everything. The key to bringing the Harringtons down. Solomon's heart pounded. "What does it open?" Martha shook her head. "I don't know. Your mama never told me. But she said that when the time was right you would know. You would figure it out." "How am I supposed to figure it out? I'm just a slave. I can't even leave this plantation." Martha reached out and took Solomon's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You ain't just a slave, Solomon. You're Augustus Harrington's son. You got his blood in your veins. And one day, that blood is going to mean something. One day you're going to use it to destroy everything he built." She paused, eyes boring into his. "But not yet. You're too young, too weak. If you try to fight them now, they'll kill you. Just like they killed your mama. You need to wait. Grow strong. Learn everything you can about them and their world. And then when you're ready, make them pay." Solomon listened to every word, absorbed it all. And in that moment, sitting outside Martha's cabin, as the sun set over magnolia fields, he made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. He would wait. Grow strong. Learn. And then he would destroy the Harrington family, one by one, until nothing remained but ashes and memory. The war continued. Union armies pushed deeper into the South. At Magnolia Fields, things fell apart. Augustus Harrington died in January 1865, just months before the war ended. His health, declining for years, finally gave out. He died in his bed, surrounded by servants, not family. His sons were still fighting, his wife long dead. And the son he had never acknowledged was working in the fields, not knowing his father had taken his last breath. The will was read 3 days after the funeral. Edward and Theodore Harrington, both granted emergency leave to attend, sat in the lawyer's office. Listening, Edward received the plantation, Theodore the railroad interests, various sums to relatives and charities. Everything as expected. Then Whitfield read the final clause. "I wish to acknowledge my natural son, Solomon, born to the slave woman Bessie in 1849. The room went silent. Edward and Theodore exchanged glances, shock, disgust, and something else of fear. "This is preposterous," Theodore said. "Our father would never have written such a thing. He was not in his right mind." Whitfield shifted uncomfortably. "I assure you, Mr. Harrington, your father was of sound mind when he dictated this will. I witnessed it myself." "Then you witnessed a fraud," Edward said, cold and controlled. "This document is a forgery. Some scheme by abolitionists to embarrass our family." "Sir, I must protest." "You must do nothing," Theodore interrupted. "This will is invalid. The clause about the slave is especially invalid. It violates numerous laws regarding the disposition of property. We will not honor it." Whitfield knew arguing was pointless. He had seen that look in the Harrington brothers' eyes before. Men used to getting what they wanted by any means necessary. "What do you wish me to do with the document?" he asked. Edward and Theodore exchanged another glance. "A silent communication. Destroy it," Edward said. "Burn it. Pretend it never existed." And so Samuel Whitfield, lawyer, witness, and coward, did exactly that. He took the will that acknowledged Solomon as Augustus Harrington's son, the will that would have granted him freedom, and 50,000, and burned it in his office fireplace. Ashes floated up the chimney, disappearing into the night sky. Solomon, still working the fields, never knew how close he had come to a different life. The war ended in April 1865. Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox. The Confederacy collapsed. Within weeks, Union soldiers arrived at Magnolia Fields and told the slaves they were free. Solomon was 15. He had spent his entire life in bondage, never traveling more than a mile from where he was born. Suddenly, impossibly, he could go anywhere, do anything, be anyone. The other slaves celebrated, sang, danced, hugged each other, crying tears of joy. For them, this was the moment they had dreamed of for generations. But Solomon did not celebrate. He stood apart, watching the Union soldiers with suspicious eyes. He had learned not to trust white people. He had learned that freedom could be a trick, another way to hurt you when you least expected it. And besides, he had unfinished business. Before leaving Magnolia Fields forever, Solomon went to the oak tree. He dug beneath its roots, following Martha's directions, and found the medallion, tarnished from years in the earth. But the initials, A.H., were still visible. When he opened the back, just as Martha had described, he found the tiny key hidden inside. Solomon held the key in his palm and stared at it. This small piece of metal was connected to his mother's death, connected to the Harringtons, connected to a secret someone had killed to protect. He didn't know what the key opened. He didn't know how he would find out. But he made a promise to himself and to his mother's memory. He would discover the truth. Use it to destroy the Harringtons. Make them suffer the way they had made his mother suffer. With the medallion around his neck and the key in his pocket, Solomon Graves walked off Magnolia Fields for the first and last time. He did not look back. He did not say goodbye. He just walked north toward a future he could not imagine, carrying the past like a weight. 15 years old, owning nothing but the clothes on his back, knowing no one outside the plantation. And he was going to war. A war that would last 30 years, a war he intended to win. The years after the war were brutal for former slaves. Freedom turned out not to mean safety, or food, or shelter. Across the South, millions of black men, women, and children found themselves released from bondage, but abandoned to a hostile world that wanted them dead. Solomon walked north with nothing but determination. He traveled at night to avoid bands of white men who hunted freed slaves for sport. He ate whatever he could find: berries, roots, small animals caught with bare hands. He slept in ditches and abandoned barns, always with one eye open, ready to run. It took him 3 weeks to reach Savannah. The city was chaos. Union soldiers patrolled the streets. Freed slaves crowded into makeshift camps, waiting for help that never came. Disease spread like wildfire: cholera, typhoid, starvation. People died every day. Solomon didn't stay in the camps. He had seen enough death. He wanted life. He found work at the Savannah docks, loading and unloading ships for 12 hours a day. The pay was terrible. Just a few cents. But it was more money than he had ever seen. He saved every penny. Ate the cheapest food. Slept in a corner of a warehouse on a pile of rope. And every night before sleep, he took out the medallion and looked at the key hidden inside. He still didn't know what it opened. But he knew that someday, somehow, he would discover the truth. 5 years passed. Solomon learned to read properly during those years. He found a black church that offered evening classes. An old preacher named Reverend Thomas taught him to read the Bible, then Shakespeare, then newspapers, then legal documents. Solomon absorbed knowledge like a sponge, hungry for it, desperate. Knowledge was power, and power was what he needed to destroy the Harringtons. He also learned business. Working at the docks, he watched how money moved, how ships brought goods from one place and sold them in another, how white men got rich buying low and selling high, while black men did all the work and got nothing. By 1870, Solomon had saved enough for his first investment. He bought a small share in a coal shipment heading to Baltimore. Risky. If the ship sank, he would lose everything. But the ship arrived safely, and his tiny investment doubled. He reinvested and doubled again. This was the beginning of Solomon's transformation, from former slave into something the world had never seen. A black man with money, with power, a black man who would use that power to burn down everything the Harrington family had built. Solomon moved to Baltimore in 1870. He was 21 and had nearly 1,000 VEDF. Enian o armono u sasu mefo were a bill C cam an nto sada waste. Bu doidinu u 1,000 saved. An enormous sum for a black man in those days. Buthanu 1,000 was nothing compared to what the Harringtons had. Nothing compared to what he would need to destroy them. So he kept working, saving, investing. He changed his name his first year in Baltimore. Solomon Graves was a slave name, a name that marked him as property, that would follow him like a chain. He needed a new name, one that belonged to a free man, one that commanded respect. He chose Samuel Grayson. No particular meaning. He just liked the sound. Samuel was biblical, strong, dignified. Grayson reminded him of his gray eyes, the eyes that marked him as Augustus Harrington's son. Together, the names created a new identity, a blank slate, a man with no past and an unlimited future. Samuel Grayson began building his empire. He started with coal, the same coal that powered the steam engines on the Harrington railroads. There was irony in that, and Solomon appreciated irony. Every ton of coal he sold was another brick in the wall, another weapon in his arsenal. He bought shares in coal mines, ships to transport coal, warehouses to store it. Within 5 years, he controlled a significant portion of the mid-Atlantic coal trade. Within 10, he was one of the largest coal merchants on the East Coast. But he didn't stop. He invested in steel, shipping, real estate. Bought buildings in Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York. Hired white lawyers who didn't know their employer was a former slave to manage his affairs. Created a network of companies and trusts that hid his true identity behind layers of paperwork. To the outside world, Samuel Grayson was a mystery. Some said he was from Brazil, others from the Caribbean. A few whispered that he had mixed blood, that one parent was white. But no one knew the truth. No one suspected that Samuel Grayson had once been Solomon Graves, a slave boy from a Georgia plantation. And that was exactly how Solomon wanted it. During all those years of building his fortune, Solomon never forgot his mission. He gathered information about the Harrington family like a general gathering intelligence before battle. He learned that Edward Harrington, the eldest brother, had died in 1878. The official story, a hunting accident. Edward had been out with Theodore when his gun accidentally discharged, killing him instantly. But Solomon didn't believe in accidents, not when the Harringtons were involved. He hired private investigators, bribed servants and former employees, pieced together what had really happened that day. The truth was ugly but not surprising. Edward and Theodore had been fighting for years about the family business. Edward wanted to modernize, invest in new technologies, treat workers better. Theodore wanted to squeeze every penny of profit from existing operations, no matter the cost. The brothers hated each other with a hatred only family can produce. Then, during a hunting trip in the mountains of Virginia, Edward's gun had, accidentally, discharged at point-blank range, blowing half his head off. Theodore was the only witness. Theodore brought the body back, arranged the funeral, inherited everything, and took control of the Harrington empire. Solomon knew murder when he saw it. Theodore had killed his own brother to become sole heir, and he had gotten away with it because he was rich and white and powerful. The discovery didn't surprise Solomon. It didn't even make him angry. It just confirmed what he already knew: the Harringtons were monsters. They would destroy anyone in their way, even their own blood, which meant Solomon would have to be very, very careful. By 1885, Solomon was 46 and worth several $1 million. He had spent 2 decades building fortune and gathering information. He knew almost everything about the Harrington family, about Theodore's murder of his brother, about their history of fraud and bribery, about the dozens of workers who had died in their mines and on their railroads, deaths covered up, families paid off with pocket change. But he still didn't know what the key opened. The tiny key from the medallion had haunted him for over 20 years. He had tried hundreds of locks, thousands, any lock connected to the Harringtons. Nothing worked. The key remained a mystery, and without knowing what it opened, Solomon felt like he was missing the final piece. Then, in the summer of 1886, a woman came to see him. Her name was Josephine de Vierox. She was 50. Elegant, well-dressed, and black. She had been a slave at Magnolia Fields, working in the big house as a seamstress. She had known Bessie, known Solomon as a child, and she had spent the 20 years since the war building a new life in Boston, running a successful dress shop for wealthy white women. Josephine had tracked Solomon down through his business network. It had taken months to penetrate the layers of secrecy he had built, but she was persistent, and she had information he would want. "I know what that key opens," she said. They sat in Solomon's private office in Baltimore, door locked, windows closed, servants dismissed. Whatever Josephine had to say, he wanted no witnesses. "Tell me." Josephine leaned forward. "There's a hidden compartment in Augustus Harrington's study. A safe built into the wall behind a painting. Nobody knows about it except the family. I only found out because I was mending curtains one day and saw Theodore opening it. He didn't know I was there." Solomon's heart pounded. "What's inside the safe?" "A book. A black leather book. Theodore calls it the family's insurance policy. It contains records of every crime the Harringtons have ever committed. Bribes, murders, fraud, everything. Augustus started keeping it decades ago as protection against anyone who might try to betray him. If he went down, he wanted to take everyone else with him. And the key." Josephine smiled. "The safe has 2 locks. One is a combination lock that only Theodore knows. The other is a key lock, a very unusual key lock with a tiny mechanism Augustus designed himself. She pointed at Solomon's chest, where the medallion hung beneath his shirt. That key is the only one of its kind. Augustus gave it to your mother, probably as some twisted love token. He never imagined she would keep it. Never imagined she would pass it to her son. And he certainly never imagined that her son would come back to claim what was his. Solomon sat in silence for a long moment. Everything was falling into place. The key, the safe, the book. After more than 20 years of searching, he finally understood what his mother had known, what she had died for. The black book was the weapon. It contained proof of everything the Harringtons had done. With that book, he could destroy them, expose their crimes, make them pay for his mother's murder. But there was a problem. The safe has 2 locks, he said. I have the key, but I don't have the combination. Josephine nodded. That's why I came to you. I don't know the combination either, but I know someone who might. Someone who hates Theodore Harrington almost as much as you do. Woo. His wife, Catherine. Catherine Harrington was the daughter of a Boston shipping magnate, William Ashford. She had married Theodore in 1875. She was 19. He was 32. An arranged marriage designed to merge 2 powerful families. From the outside, Catherine seemed the perfect wife. Hosted parties, organized charities, smiled and said the right things. But behind closed doors, her life was a nightmare. Theodore was cruel, had been cruel as a child, torturing animals and bullying servants. As a young man, using family money to escape consequences. As a husband, treating Catherine like property. He controlled every aspect of her life, what she wore, who she talked to, when she could leave the house. He hit her when she disobeyed, carefully, where bruises wouldn't show. And he reminded her constantly that she was nothing without him, that her family's fortune depended on his goodwill, that if she ever tried to leave, he would destroy everyone she loved. Catherine endured 18 years of this. She endured because she had no choice. Society offered no protection for abused wives. Divorce was considered worse than death for a woman of her class. But deep inside, beneath the smiles and parties and perfect facade, Catherine Harrington was building a fire of her own. A fire of hatred and resentment, waiting for the right moment to explode. Solomon was going to give her that moment. The plan came together over the following months. Josephine served as intermediary between Solomon and Catherine. The 2 women had met years ago at a charity event and maintained a secret friendship. Catherine trusted Josephine, and when Josephine told her about Solomon, his true identity, his plan to destroy Theodore, Catherine was ready to help. She provided information about the mansion's layout, Theodore's schedule, the names of servants who could be bribed and guards who could be avoided, but she could not provide the combination to the safe. Theodore has never told me, she explained in a letter. He keeps it locked in his memory, but I believe I know someone who might. His mother, Edith. Edith Harrington was Augustus's second wife, married in 1859 after Helena's death, more for companionship than love. She was 81 now, frail, largely confined to her rooms at Rosecliff Manor. Theodore kept her around because getting rid of her would look bad, but he paid her no attention. Assumed she was senile. Assumed she knew nothing. He was wrong. Edith had been watching, listening, remembering. For decades, she had observed the crimes of her husband and stepson. She had kept silent out of fear. But now, at the end of her life, she was tired of being afraid. She wanted to see justice done before she died, and she was willing to help Solomon make it happen. Catherine arranged a meeting. Solomon arrived at Rosecliff Manor on a night in late September 1891. He came through the servants' entrance, dressed in simple clothes like a delivery man. Catherine met him at the door and led him through back passages and hidden stairways to Edith's private rooms. The old woman was waiting. Edith Harrington was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, white hair, skin like paper. But her eyes were sharp, clear, intelligent. She studied Solomon for a long moment. His face, his eyes, the shape of his jaw. "You have Augustus's eyes," she finally said. "I noticed it the moment I first saw you at the charity ball last month. Those gray eyes. I spent 40 years looking at those eyes. I would know them anywhere." Solomon sat. "You know who I am. I know exactly who you are. You're the son he never acknowledged. The child he was too cowardly to claim. The reminder of his sins that he tried to burn away." Solomon's body went rigid. "What do you know about the fire?" Edith's face twisted with old pain. "I know everything. I was there that night. Not at the cabin, but in the big house. I saw Theodore talking to Silas Crenshaw earlier that evening. I saw money change hands. And I saw Theodore watching from his window when the flames started." The world seemed to stop. Solomon had always suspected his mother's death was murder, but he had never been able to prove it. Never known who was responsible. Now he knew. "Theodore killed my mother." Edith nodded slowly. He was afraid. His father had been talking about changing the will, about acknowledging you. Theodore couldn't allow that. Couldn't risk sharing the inheritance with a slave's son. So he paid Crenshaw to start the fire, to eliminate the threat. Solomon's hands shook, not from fear, but from rage. Pure, white, hot rage kept buried for 30 years. "Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you stop him?" Why'd Edith's eyes filled with tears? "Because I was a coward. Because I was afraid of what Theodore would do to me. Because I told myself it wasn't my business. That slaves died all the time. That one more death didn't matter." She reached out and took Solomon's hand. "I was wrong. I've spent 40 years knowing I was wrong. And I want to make it right before I die." She reached into her dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is the combination to the safe. I watched Augustus open it 100 times. I memorized the numbers without him knowing." Solomon took the paper with trembling fingers. "There's more," Edith continued. "Inside the safe, along with the black book, there's something else. A document Augustus wrote before he died. A second will. A second will. The first will, the one that acknowledged you, was destroyed by Samuel Whitfield after Augustus died. Theodore and Edward forced him to burn it. But Augustus didn't trust Whitfield. He made a copy himself and hid it in the safe. A copy nobody knows about except me." Solomon could barely breathe. "Are you saying there's legal proof that I'm Augustus Harrington's son? That I was supposed to inherit?" Edith nodded. "The will specifies that you are entitled to half of all Harrington assets. It also specifies that you must claim your inheritance by your 40th birthday, or the provision becomes void." Solomon's heart sank. "I'm 42. Wes, the legal deadline has passed. You cannot claim the inheritance through the courts." Edith squeezed his hand. "But the will still proves who you are. It proves Augustus acknowledged you as his son. And combined with the black book, it proves Theodore killed your mother to prevent you from claiming what was rightfully yours." Solomon understood. The legal battle was lost, but the court of public opinion was still open. If he could expose the Harringtons' crimes, show the world what they had done, he could destroy them just as completely as any lawsuit, maybe more completely. "There's one more thing," Edith said. "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "My granddaughter, Lily. She's 17, the only innocent person in this family. Theodore is planning to marry her off to a business associate. A horrible man 3 times her age. I need you to protect her. When you bring down the Harringtons, make sure Lily escapes. Can you promise me that?" Solomon looked into the old woman's eyes and saw something he had not expected: love. Genuine love for her granddaughter, the only pure thing left in this family of monsters. "I promise," he said. Edith smiled, the first real smile she had allowed herself in years. "Then go. Take the combination. Find the book, and burn them all to the ground." The plan was set for the Harrington Autumn Ball, scheduled for October 2nd, 1891. It was the biggest social event of the Newport season. 500 guests, the cream of American society, newspaper reporters from every major publication. The perfect stage for Solomon's revelation. But Theodore Harrington was not a fool. He had survived this long by being paranoid, trusting no one, eliminating threats before they could grow. And he had noticed something was wrong. A stranger in Newport, a wealthy black man named Samuel Grayson, who had appeared out of nowhere, asked too many questions, seemed to be everywhere the Harringtons were. Theodore hired a detective named Malcolm Vance. Pinkerton, one of the best. 20 years of tracking criminals, exposing secrets, destroying lives. Expensive and effective. Within 2 weeks, he had uncovered the truth. Samuel Grayson did not exist before 1870. His entire identity was a fabrication. Beneath it was a former slave from Magnolia Fields named Solomon Graves. Theodore received the report on September 28th, 4 days before the ball. He acted immediately. That night, armed men broke into Solomon's rented mansion. They beat him, dragged him to a warehouse on the Newport docks, tied him to a chair and waited for their employer. Theodore Harrington walked in just after midnight, dressed in evening clothes, coming directly from a dinner party. His eyes were cold, his smile cruel. "So, you're the bastard," he said, circling Solomon's chair. "The son of the slave my father liked to visit. I thought you died in the fire with your mother." Solomon's face was bloody, ribs cracked, but his voice steady. "Sorry to disappoint you." Theodore laughed, not a pleasant sound. "You've caused me a lot of trouble, Solomon. All these years, I thought the problem was solved. Thought Crenshaw had taken care of everything. But here you are, like a cockroach that refuses to die. You admit it, then. You ordered the fire. You killed my mother." Theodore shrugged. "She was a slave, a threat. What difference does it make now? No one will believe your word against mine. No court in this country would take the testimony of a Negro over a Harrington." He leaned close to Solomon's face. "You've lost. Whatever you were planning, it's over. You're going to disappear tonight, just like your mother should have disappeared 30 years ago." He turned to his men. "Kill him. Dump the body in the harbor. Make sure it's never found." Solomon closed his eyes. He had come so close to justice, to revenge. And now it would end in a dirty warehouse, at the hands of hired thugs, with no one ever knowing what had happened. He thought of his mother, her face in the firelight, her last words, "Avenge our blood." He had failed her. Then the shooting started. The first bullet hit the man closest to Solomon. He dropped without a sound. The second hit another in the shoulder, spinning him around. The third went through the warehouse window, missing Theodore by inches. Theodore dove for cover behind a stack of crates. His remaining men scattered, pulling weapons, trying to find the shooter. More shots, more screams, bodies falling. Then a woman's voice, clear and commanding, "Solomon, can you move?" Solomon opened his eyes. Standing in the warehouse doorway, holding a smoking revolver, was Catherine Harrington. She wore a simple dark dress. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. Her face was pale but determined. She was pointing her gun directly at her husband's hiding spot. "Catherine." Theodore's voice was incredulous. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done years ago." She fired another shot that splintered the crate near his head. "Stay down, Theodore. The next one won't miss." She ran to Solomon and cut his ropes. "Can you walk?" "I think so." His legs were shaky, but they held. "Then we need to move. More of his men are coming." They fled into the night. Behind them, Theodore screamed for his guards. Torches lit, dogs released. The hunt was on. Catherine led Solomon through back alleys and hidden paths she had memorized during her years as Theodore's prisoner. She knew Newport better than anyone. Every shadow, every hiding place, every road avoiding main streets. By dawn, they were safe in a small cottage on the outskirts of town, rented by Josephine under a false name, stocked with supplies, ready for emergencies. Solomon collapsed onto a bed, his body screaming with pain. Catherine cleaned his wounds with water and cloth, working efficiently. "How did you know?" Solomon asked. "How did you know where to find me?" Lily heard Theodore giving orders to his men. "She came to me immediately. She's a good girl, braver than anyone gives her credit for. Theodore will know you helped me. He'll come for you." Catherine's jaw tightened. "Let him come. I'm done being afraid of him. Done being his prisoner." She finished bandaging his wounds and sat back. "The ball is in 4 days. Can you still do it? Can you still expose him?" Solomon thought about the combination in his pocket. The safe, the black book, the second will. Everything he needed was still waiting inside Rosacliff Manor. "Yes," he said. "I can still do it. But I'll need help getting inside." Catherine nodded. "You'll have it. Lily and I will make sure every door is open." For the first time in days, Solomon allowed himself to hope. The plan was damaged, but not destroyed. Theodore thought he was dead. An advantage, an opportunity for surprise. The ball was in 4 days, and Solomon intended to give Newport a night they would never forget. October 2nd, 1891. Rosacliff Manor blazed with light. Every window glowed. Every chandelier sparkled. Music and laughter drifted across the manicured grounds on the cool autumn breeze. 500 of America's most powerful people had gathered for the Harrington Autumn Ball. Bankers, industrialists, politicians, newspaper publishers, society matrons dripping with diamonds, young men in perfectly tailored suits. The elite of the Gilded Age, assembled to celebrate wealth and power and everything money could buy. Theodore Harrington stood at the center of it all, accepting congratulations and shaking hands. He had recovered from the events of 4 nights ago. His men had found no body in the harbor, but also no trace of Solomon. Theodore had convinced himself the problem was solved. That Solomon had fled, that he was safe. He was wrong. Solomon Graves entered Rosacliff Manor through the servants' entrance at exactly 9:00 p.m. He was disguised as a waiter, dressed in the same simple uniform as dozens of other black servants moving invisibly through the crowd. No one looked at him twice. No one asked his name. He was invisible, just another Negro carrying a tray. He made his way through the service corridors, following the route Catherine had mapped deep past the kitchens, past the wine cellar, up a narrow staircase to the family's private rooms. The study door was unlocked, just as promised. Solomon slipped inside and closed the door behind him. The room was dark, lit only by moonlight through tall windows. Muffled music drifted from the ballroom below, softened by thick walls and heavy carpets. The painting was exactly where Josephine had described it, a portrait of Augustus Harrington in his prime, hanging above the fireplace. Solomon lifted it from the wall and found the safe behind it. 2 locks, 1 combination, 1 key. His fingers trembled as he entered the numbers Edith had given him. 3 turns right. 2 turns left. 1 turn right. Click. He pulled the medallion from around his neck and inserted the tiny key into the second lock. It fit perfectly. He turned it. Click. The safe swung open. Inside, Solomon found exactly what Edith had promised, the black book, bound in leather so dark it seemed to absorb the moonlight. A stack of yellowed documents, and a single sheet of paper covered in faded handwriting he recognized from old plantation records. The second will. Proof he was Augustus Harrington's son. Solomon took everything. Stuffed the documents into his jacket. Held the black book against his chest like a shield. Then the door opened. Malcolm Vance stood in the doorway, a pistol in his hand. "Mr. Grayson, or should I say Mr. Graves?" He smiled. "Mr. Harrington will be very interested to know you're still alive." Solomon's mind raced. He was unarmed, trapped. His plan was falling apart for the second time in 4 days. Then something unexpected happened. A silver candlestick came down on the back of Vance's head. The detective crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Standing behind him, holding the candlestick, was a young woman with auburn hair and frightened eyes. "Lily Harrington. Miss Josephine sent me to watch the door," she whispered. "We need to go now." Solomon followed her out of the study, through more hidden passages, down more secret stairs. The girl moved quickly and quietly, clearly terrified but determined. They emerged near the ballroom, just as Theodore stepped onto a raised platform to address his guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," Theodore's voice boomed. "Thank you for joining us for what promises to be a historic evening. I am pleased to announce a partnership that will reshape American industry." Solomon pushed through the crowd of servants, ignoring confused looks and whispered questions. He had one chance. One moment. He could not waste it. He reached the edge of the ballroom just as Theodore raised his champagne glass. "I present to you the future of American railroads. The Harrington-Morgan Alliance." Theodore Harrington. Solomon's voice cut through the applause like a knife. Every head turned toward him. 500 pairs of eyes stared at the bloody, bruised black man who had suddenly appeared among them. Theodore's face went pale. "Guards, seize that man." But Solomon was already moving. He pushed past the guards, vaulted onto the platform, and stood face to face with the man who had murdered his mother. "My name is Solomon Graves," he announced to the stunned crowd. "Son of Bessie Graves, son of Augustus Harrington. And I have a story to tell." The ballroom went silent. Not the comfortable silence of a pause in conversation, but the shocked silence of people confronted with something they could not understand. Solomon opened the black book. Page 1. January 1852. Bribe paid to Judge William Mercer, Augusta County, to dismiss charges of assault against Augustus Harrington. Amount, $5,000. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Page 17, March 1858. Payment to Pinkerton agents to intimidate union organizers at the Harrington rail yard in Baltimore. 3 workers hospitalized, 1 worker dead. The murmurs grew louder. Page 47, March 12, 1863. Solomon's voice cracked slightly. Order given to Overseer Silas Crenshaw to eliminate the slave Bessie and her son. Method: fire. Result: Bessie killed. Son escaped. A gasps. Shocked faces. Women covering their mouths. Theodore lunged forward. "This is lies!" "This man is a fraud, a criminal." But Solomon was not finished. Page 72, October 1878. Notes on the death of Edward Harrington. Method: staged hunting accident. Reason: to secure sole inheritance of family assets. The room erupted. Edward Harrington had been popular in society. Many guests knew him personally. The suggestion that Theodore had murdered his own brother was explosive. Theodore grabbed Solomon's jacket. "You have no proof. This book is a forgery." Is this a forgery too? An old woman's voice silenced the chaos. Everyone turned. Edith Harrington, supported by Catherine and Lily, walked slowly toward the platform. In her hand, she held a letter. This is a confession written by my husband, Augustus Harrington, on his deathbed. It confirms everything this man has said. It acknowledges Solomon as his legitimate son, and it describes the crimes of the Harrington family in explicit detail. She handed the letter to a man in the front row. Solomon recognized him from newspaper photographs. Joseph Pulitzer, publisher of the New York World. Publish it, Edith said. Let the world know what monsters I married into. Theodore's face twisted with rage. He pulled a knife from inside his jacket and lunged at Solomon. The blade caught Solomon's arm, drawing blood. But Solomon had survived worse. He grabbed Theodore's wrist, twisted, and forced him to drop the knife. Years of physical labor had made him strong. Years of hatred had made him ruthless. He could have killed Theodore. He wanted to kill Theodore. Every fiber of his being screamed for blood, for revenge, for justice. But he looked at Theodore's face, pathetic and frightened, and realized something. Killing this man would make Solomon a murderer. It would give Theodore's defenders an excuse to dismiss everything he had revealed. It would taint his victory with blood. Solomon released Theodore's wrist and stepped back. I'm not going to kill you, he said. I'm going to do something worse. I'm going to let you live. I'm going to let you watch as everything you built crumbles to dust. Every friend will abandon you. Every ally will betray you. Your name will become a curse. Your legacy will be shame. He turned to the crowd of stunned, silent witnesses. That is my revenge. The aftermath was everything Solomon had hoped for, and more. Joseph Pulitzer published Edith's letter and excerpts from the Black Book on the front page of the New York World. Within days, every newspaper in America had picked up the story. The Harrington scandal. They called it the crime of the century. Theodore was arrested and charged with fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. His trial lasted 3 months, the most sensational legal proceeding of the decade. Witness after witness came forward. Servants who had kept silent for years, business partners who had been cheated, victims who had never dared to speak. Theodore Harrington was convicted on all counts, sentenced to 20 years in prison. He died there 3 years later of a fever that swept through his cell block. The newspapers reported that no one came to claim his body. The Harrington assets were seized and liquidated. The railroad empire sold off in pieces. The Newport mansion put up for auction, and Solomon Graves, using the fortune he had built over 30 years, bought it. 6 months after the ball, Solomon stood in front of Rosacliff Manor. The building had been transformed, gaudy decorations removed, ostentatious displays of wealth gone. In their places, simple furnishings, practical equipment, and something that had never existed in this house before: children. 50 black children, orphans and refugees from the harsh streets of northern cities, now lived in the mansion built with slave labor. They slept in rooms where wealthy guests had once danced, ate in dining halls where champagne had once flowed, learned to read and write in libraries that had been filled with unread books. The Bessie Graves School for Negro Children opened its doors in April 1892. Solomon hired the best teachers he could find, stocked the library with thousands of books, equipped workshops for learning trades. He created something the Harringtons could never have imagined, a place where the descendants of slaves could become doctors, lawyers, teachers, leaders. A place where his mother's dream could finally come true. On the day the school opened, Solomon hung a bronze plaque by the front entrance. It read, "In memory of Bessie Graves, 1825-1863, slave, mother." Hero. She dreamed of a world where her son would be free. This building is that dream made real. May every child who enters these doors carry her spirit forward into the future. Solomon lived another 30 years. He saw the school grow from 50 students to 500. Saw his graduates become doctors who healed the sick, lawyers who fought for justice, teachers who educated the next generation. Saw the world begin to change, slowly, painfully, toward something better. He never married, never had children of his own. The students at his school became his family. They called him Uncle Solomon, then Grandpa Solomon. They sat at his feet and listened to his stories about the old days, about slavery and freedom and the long road in between. On his deathbed in 1922, surrounded by children and grandchildren of students he had taught, Solomon spoke his final words, "Mama, I did it. I kept my promise." He was buried next to the oak tree, where Martha had hidden the medallion 73 years before. His tombstone was simple, just a name and 2 dates. But beneath the dates, at Solomon's request, was carved a single sentence: "The truth will make you free." The Bessie Graves School continued to operate until 1954, when it merged with other institutions following the Brown v. Board of Education decision. Over 6 decades, it educated more than 10,000 students. Many became leaders in the civil rights movement. Some remembered the old man who had founded the school, the former slave with gray eyes, who had brought down one of America's most powerful families. Solomon Graves never became famous. His name does not appear in history books. The Harrington scandal has been largely forgotten, overshadowed by the wars and crises that followed. But his legacy endures. Every black doctor who heals a patient, every black lawyer who wins a case, every black teacher who inspires a student, they are all in some way the children of Solomon Graves, the descendants of his dream, the proof that one man's courage can change the world. The Harringtons built their empire on cruelty and greed. They believed money and power could protect them from justice forever. They were wrong. Solomon Graves proved that the truth cannot be buried, that justice cannot be bought, that the sins of the past will always catch up with those who commit them. He proved that revenge is not about destroying your enemies. It is about building the world they tried to deny you, turning your pain into purpose, living so fully that their memory fades while yours becomes eternal. That is the true story of the Heir of Shadows. A slave who became a millionaire, a son who avenged his mother, a man who turned a mansion of oppression into a house of hope.